Welcome back to the channel. Let's jump into the next chapter in Hot Rod's book, In the Pit with Piper. Chapter 4. The Portland Years. The next challenge in my wrestling career would take place on the Oregon circuit. I hopped into my brand spanking new Silver Caprice Classic and said goodbye to LA and hello to Portland. In keeping with tradition, when I reached the city limits, I opened up my window to alert the new town that Roddy Piper had arrived. But this time something was different. Instead of having to roll my window down, I just had to push a button, because now I was driving with power both in my car and in my career. Once I felt the cool Oregon breeze, I stuck my head out of my Caprice and yelled, "Look out, Portland, here I come, and I'm going to kick your fucking ass." Of course no one heard me but God. After all, who else was listening? And moreover, who else cared? I then made my way into town and hooked up with Buddy Rose. He would introduce me to Don Owens and his brother Elton, who was also a promoter, controlling the Eugene, Medford, and Salem promotions. During my time in Oregon, I would find Don Owens to be one of the fairer promoters in the professional character and was down there with the low of the low. He was an oddball. He would always introduce himself to people by saying, "Hello, I'm Don Owens' brother Elton." And everything about this guy was bad. He wore a bad toupee that looked like poodle roadkill, smoked cheap cigars, and was a heavy drinker. He paid the wrestlers off in dollar bills and rolls of quarters and would watch your facial expressions while he forked over the cash. The established guys there, Stan Stasiak, Johnny Eagles, Jonathan Boyd, Killer Brooks, and Jimmy Snuka all tipped me off about what to do when Elton was paying me. They said to never smile because the reason he would stare at you when he was paying you was that he was waiting for you to crack a smile. And the minute your lips turned upward and you looked happy, Elton would stop the cash flow right there, figuring you were satisfied with your payout. It's safe to say that he wasn't very popular with the guys. Elton also had one other quirk. In every match he wanted us to shoot for the first minute or so. He would give $25 to the winner and $15 to the loser. The object of this shoot was to pin your opponent for a 1 count, which enabled the prick to determine the winner. What that old fuck didn't know was that we got together before the match and agreed to split the $40. The way we determined who was going to be pinned for the 1 count was very simple. We flipped a coin just like they do before the kickoff of every NFL game. We really didn't give a shit who won the toss or shoot. We just wanted half the cash. After every match, Elton would come into the locker room and say, "Oh boys, that was a hell of a shoot." At the end of the day everyone was happy. We got to split the money and Elton got a hard-on. I guess he never heard of Viagra. Other than Buddy, one of the first wrestlers I came into contact with in Portland was Killer Tim Brooks, who was also known as the Waxahachie Wildman. Besides helping me get started on the Oregon beat, it was Tim who was to introduce me to the love of my life, Kitty. Killer was a wonderful man who had hair all over his body except on his head. And he loved to smoke these little cigars. He was the full wrestling package in more ways than one. The promoters both loved and hated to have him on their cards. Brooks was a hot commodity who could help sell out a territory in an instant, but he was also a time bomb that was waiting to explode. The cigar-loving grappler had a rebel side in him that was great in the ring but dangerous outside of it. Despite the cigar stench he reeked of, I took an instant liking to him, especially when he and I teamed up to play some nasty tricks on Elton Owens. Killer Brooks was surely one of a kind. One of the finer memories I have of my time with Killer was when we were wrestling on a card in Salem for Elton. It was in a dirty building that had old dried-up blood on the floors and walls in the cruddy dressing rooms from years of use and abuse by wrestlers. It was definitely one of the worst facilities either of us had ever wrestled in, but we tried to make the best of the situation. Unfortunately, Elton had a way of making a bad situation worse. One night, just as we're all getting ready to go out and give the Salem people their money's worth, Elton strolls into the locker room sucking on one of his cheap cigars, and starts running his mouth. At one point he gets so wrapped up in what he's saying that he takes his cigar out of his mouth and puts it down on one of the tables in the dressing room so he can rant and rave about the night's matches. Elton is so busy yelling at us that he doesn't notice Killer grab the cigar and stick the lip end up his own ass and twist it around a couple of times, and then put it right back where he found it. Now folks, I swear this is the truth. About 5 minutes later Elton finishes his rant, turns and picks up his cigar, and puts it in his mouth. We were all holding in our laughter, trying to keep a straight face. Watching Owen suck on that asswipe cigar, I was dying inside. Holding in the laughter was so hard that my eyes started watering. Elton looked at me with a puzzled expression and asked me what was the matter. I didn't dare say a word because I was afraid I'd just burst out laughing. So I just shrugged my shoulders. Elton just shook his head and told us to hurry up and get ready for the next match. As he was walking out of the locker room, he took a big puff of his cigar and muttered, "F. It smells like shit in here." It's times like that you just don't forget. Another crappy Elton Owens story came when we were wrestling in Roseburg, Oregon. Again, the cheap son of a bitch booked us to wrestle in a dump. This place didn't even have locker rooms, just a big stage that everybody used to change on. To make matters worse, there weren't even any showers. In order to get cleaned up after the match, we had to walk through the crowd, past the hot dog stand, and take turns using the sinks that they had kept the hot dogs in. Now just imagine the scene after the match. A bunch of sweaty, smelly wrestlers are all trying to share this little old sink. Let me tell you, it wasn't a pretty sight. Another thing that wasn't pretty was that there were no bathrooms close to the stage. In order to reach the toilet, we again had to make our way through the crowd, past the hot dog guy and past the sink. Well, it just so happens that I had to go to the bathroom right before I was supposed to go on. There was no way I was going to make that trek down through the arena, for all the people who hated me and who I was about to perform in front of. It would have been easier if I had to take a piss. I could have found a corner or bottle anywhere. But number 2 was going to be tricky. So I found a dark spot on the corner of the stage, took a brown paper bag, pulled my trunks down, and proceeded to take a monstrous shit, hoping to hit the bag. But as I'm squatting, Elton decides to come up on stage. Thinking quickly, I hold the corner of the bag and start doing free squats, with my trunks just far enough up to cover my front. As he comes by, he stops for a second and, thinking I'm doing exercises before I go on, says, "Ah, you're a good kid, always staying in shape. But geez, it smells like shit in here." Elton left and I finished my dump and threw the bag over by the furnace, and then I went on to wrestle. Killer and I were not only sharing laughs together at this time, we also were living together. Johnny Eagles had helped Killer and me find a lovely place in the same apartment complex where he was living. The 2-bedroom place was very nice, at least before we started living in it. The two of us did pretty well for ourselves while we were living together, both in the ring and on the social scene. There was one girl in particular who left a lasting impression on me. Killer Brooks had this girlfriend we called Wombat. Whenever he wanted to sow his oats, he'd go into his room with Wombat. To tell you the truth, I don't really know what went on behind those closed doors because I was doing my own thing, but in all honesty I didn't want to know. I would wake up early every Saturday morning to go to the gym because there would be all this funk in that apartment, tons of empty beer bottles and cans, cigar butts, and what looked like spit on the floor. What these two did nobody knows, but shit was starting to grow in there, man. And to top it off, there was this terrible aroma that filled the apartment that seemed to exude from Killer's room after a night of combat. Wombat was a nice-looking girl and all, but what she could be doing with Killer and to Killer was beyond me. When I'd come back from the gym she would be gone, so I hardly ever saw her. But one time Wombat came over to the apartment to see Killer, and he wasn't there. One thing led to another and I fiddled with her. After I did the nasty, I felt bad for making it with my roommate's girl. So I did the honorable thing that a wrestler would do and decided I wouldn't tell him. It would just cause animosity between us and, more importantly, make my life a living hell. I would have to sleep with one eye open each night, afraid that Killer would come into my room and pull a Lorena Bobbitt. Well, I soon found out that I didn't need Killer for that. I kept my little secret from my big friend for about a week until I noticed this thing starting to grow on the base of my penis. I swear to you, it had lungs of its own and was getting bigger and nastier looking by the day. I know I had a big decision to make. Do I tell Killer about what happened, hoping that he'll not only forgive me, but also provide me with some info on how to get this alien off my dick? Or do I say nothing, let my dick fall off, and live the rest of my life penisless? Hell, I knew the answer right away. I'm telling Killer. So finally I had the balls to tell Brooks. I approached him and said, "Killer, I've got a confession." I pulled my pants down, and he goes, "You've been with Wombat. That's okay, but we're gonna have to fix that." I was relieved. Killer was not mad at me, and more importantly, he had a remedy for my wombatitis. He tells me to sit down and he comes back holding this white-hot needle that he just heated up on the stove, holding it with a pair of pliers. As soon as I saw him holding that steaming needle with the pliers, I jumped up out of my seat and said, "Whoa, Killer. What are you going to do with that?" He tells me to sit down, drop your pants down, and pull your dick out. I then said, "Killer, are you sure about this?" The next thing I know he jabbed that needle into the alien dam. That hurt. And squeezed it so hard I thought it was going to burst. But he came through for me in a big way. While I still have the scar from that memorable prick, the disease never showed its ugly ass again, so I owed Killer big time for helping me out. As for Killer and me, the only problem we had was during our first meeting. If we were going to be a pair, we had to decide what we were going to do on the wrestling circuit. Both of us had been wrestling as heels throughout our careers, and Buddy Rose was also a heel at the time and was the main draw in the Oregon area. So the three of us had a powwow to try and decide how we were going to solve this problem. There were too many chiefs and not enough Indians. We had a choice to make here. We could try to cut one another's throat for the biggest piece of the pie, or we could come up with an arrangement that we were all comfortable with so each of us could come away with an equal slice. We decided that Buddy Rose and his partner, Ed Wiskowski, would be the main heels and we would become another entity. I started out my career in Portland with everyone hating me, but would make an about-face in almost no time, becoming a well-liked wrestler with the Oregon fans. The first night I was in Portland I wrestled Johnny Eagles on live TV. People had never seen anything like me before. From the bagpipes to the kilt, they didn't know what the hell to expect from me. They were used to seeing these veterans grapple the old-fashioned way. They weren't used to seeing a young kid go full throttle, looking for more and more action. What was also amazing and unique at this time in my career was that I didn't tell the people how to feel about me. I just did my thing on the mat and let the people make up their own mind. This is where the real depth, psychology, and foundation for Roddy Piper was born. I was fearless. This was also the second place where I could free fall and further develop the interviews I started in LA, establishing rules such as nobody tells me what to say in an interview. While living in Los Angeles, I once ran into Ella Fitzgerald and she gave me a great piece of advice: give them a good beginning and a great ending, and they will forgive a lot in between. The lady had it down. At this point in my career I had ascertained that interviews were 75% of professional wrestling. So on any given night my interviews had the power to make people who were sitting home and watching me on TV get so pissed off that they would elbow their wives in disbelief, then get up, get in the car, drive to the arena, pay to park, buy a handful of tickets and some popcorn, and get in their seats to yell at me while I was in the ring for my match. So when the night was over everybody went home happy. I would go back to my hotel room with their money and they would go home smiling because they'd been able to air out their frustrations. How did I rile these fans up so bad, you ask? Well, it all stemmed from my unique style of wrestling interviews that was still in development at this time. Yes, I had reached a certain level of skill on the mic while I was in LA, but now I was given free rein in Portland to try and further develop my unique style, which incorporated current events into my interviews. What was going on around town or in the world always seemed to strike a nerve in people. I also put honesty into my interviews. The technique I started to adapt to professional wrestling was one that was both direct and subliminal. For example, one time after an annual event, the Portland Rose Festival, where they have all these floats similar to the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, I did an interview that was full of double entendres. I took advantage of some poor unfortunate boob who was supposed to measure all the floats before the event began on Saturday morning to make sure they would fit down the blocks of the parade route, but he must have been asleep at the wheel because as the pipe bands were playing and all the normal hoo-ha that goes on in American parades was taking place, a rolling exhibit tried to turn the corner, but found out too late that it couldn't fit. On TV that night, I started mocking the whole situation of a float getting stuck. I said to the now attentive crowd, "Let me get this straight. You people got a float in a parade that can't even get around the corner. How stupid are you? Don't you know that the square pegs don't go in the round holes? And as I am doing this I'm lifting the sparn of my kilt. I am insinuating some type of sexual meaning by this gesture, but I'm talking about something totally different." Then I ripped into the guy who was supposed to measure the floats. What kind of brain surgeon was he? I then take the remark a couple of steps further by questioning the local politicians and teachers. These are the same people I'm paying taxes to, the same people I'm trusting to teach my children in school. You want me to put my children in a school in a town that can't figure out how to get a float around the corner in the biggest event of the year? Fact of the matter was, I was 23 years old and didn't even have any kids. The crowd got so mad. They all took what I was saying to heart. The people of Portland thought I was calling the whole town stupid. You bet your ass I was. While in Portland, I worked on a TV show that was taped in front of a live audience and aired on Saturday nights. Knowing how I could really rile up a crowd, Don Owens expected me to do an interview in the Crow's Nest, an elevated platform above the ring where the night's host conducted interviews for all to see each show. The only restriction I had was a time limit that was due to the length of the program. In order to get my point across I had to do some new things. So to better prepare, I started talking out loud in the car more and also started writing things down. I became an innovator of the concise and educated wrestling interview, which I was now treating as a kind of art form. People were getting into my interviews so much that they were taking everything I said as gospel. If I said it, they believed it. I was getting more attention than I could ever have hoped for. The fans were now watching and imitating my every move. Just to give you an idea of what was going on at the time, one night after I had cleared the ring during a televised match, I got up on the second turnbuckle and I raised both my eyebrows twice in celebration for what I had just done. Little did I know that the cameraman had a close-up of my face right at that particular moment. After that, for about a month, every place that I went, people would come up to me and raise their eyebrows. It was just this little thing I did accidentally, and now wrestling fans everywhere were copying me. It made me realize how intently people were paying attention to me. But with this awareness came responsibility. I felt pressure not to let the fans down. Fans appreciated the seriousness and value of the interviews. The show became a real moneymaker. It brought the wrestling interview to new heights. People were actually coming in paying their hard-earned money more for the interview than for the wrestling. This became more evident later in a show called Piper's Pit, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Now, because of the interviews and all of the new things we all were doing on the show, Elton Owens received the highest ratings that he had ever gotten in the 30-year history of the program. I was always looking for new ways to make my segments better. Things that would leave an impression on the audience. One night I remembered a trick I learned while I was wrestling in the Canadian Maritimes. This guy called the Beast taught it to me. This piece of business involved raking a full bottle of Heineken beer over your head. I had never tried it, but I had seen the Beast do it. I just never had any desire or need to smash myself in the head with a green bottle of beer. What a waste of beer. But now I decided to give it a go on live TV. I didn't tell anyone. This was another cardinal rule of mine. Never tell anyone what I was planning to do. When the time came for my interview, I broke the full bottle of beer against my forehead to promote an upcoming match. The impact of the blood streaming down my face from glass cuts and beer everywhere was such that the audience made very sure they came to the match. And they wouldn't be disappointed because I took that intense aggressive energy into the ring and it guaranteed a good performance. I don't recommend you try this at home because if you don't swing the bottle hard enough, you'll simply knock yourself out. About this time I also made it a rule never to talk about another wrestler's family. In these interviews I was developing, you had to have some serious rules because they could easily get too personal. For instance, I might tell a joke or a one-liner like, "Do you know why Ric Flair sleeps with two girls at the same time?" So that when he falls asleep they've got someone to talk to. Ric Flair is a married man. I always took the wrestler out of the context with his real family so that he wouldn't personally feel any emotion from the interview. But it didn't always work that way. People got pretty mad at some of the things I said and did. I was the first guy to put any significant premeditated psychology into the interviews. I also brought up anything close to my opponents that was real. I got very much in their faces. As Adrian Adonis once said to Vince McMahon Jr., Piper shoots his mouth off in the interview, but he always goes and backs it up. This is another good rule of interviewing. Your interview must be in sync with your match. In other words, you must carry through into your match what you said beforehand. Otherwise your interview means nothing. This was one of the secrets of drawing money. I'd get in the ring and back up what I'd say in interviews. This helped me become a fan favorite. I'd always have some reality base in every interview. Not just saying that I was going to rip a wrestler's lungs out, or that I was going to tear his eyes out. That's illegal. And we all know it's not going to happen in the ring. So I would base my threats on truth, on what I really could do to my opponent between the ropes. But sometimes the truth isn't as it appears on television. One night in Portland, Buddy Rose stole my kilt after I took it off in the ring, on what was billed as live TV. The event was aired 2 hours after it was taped. This show had been live for years. This was only its third week of being broadcast on tape delay, and not too many people knew about it. Well, Rose proceeded to take my kilt up to the crow's nest for an interview while I was still in the ring. I stopped wrestling and kept looking up at the crow's nest, getting the crowd's attention, and together we watched Rose put lighter fluid on my kilt and set it on fire. Upon witnessing this travesty, I ran from the ring and headed up to the crow's nest. I attempted to put the fire out with my bare hands, burning myself in the process. When this came on TV, people started calling the fire department because they thought the building was going to burn down. By the time the fire department arrived, there was obviously nobody in the arena because the match had taken place 2 hours prior. It's safe to say that the fire marshal failed to see the humor of this, but it did hit the papers the next morning. My performances were now drawing in big money and crowds. My evolving style in the ring kept the audience confused and interested at the same time. It was impossible for anyone not living inside my head, and not being in the know, to make the distinction between what was real and what was not. That alone was good enough to make people buy tickets. I've often been asked how wrestling helped my acting ability. To be honest, it was probably the worst thing that I could have done. When the movie They Live came out in 1988, a critic, I learned over the years that critics can't do anything, they can only talk or write about doing things, for the New York Post wrote, "Anybody who thinks wrestlers are actors is wrong." That of course was a direct attack on my acting, but these are the same people who were criticizing my wrestling by writing that it was all acting. When I was on the mat I was considered an actor. When I was on the big screen I was called a wrestler. I don't think it was me who was confused. There's a simple explanation for this. Wrestling does not help acting. You could say that acting is implosion, while wrestling is explosion. Basically they are opposite. My performance in the squared circle caused people to react in different ways when they met me outside the arena. People don't know how to take wrestlers. In no other sport is the athlete on the spectator's TV staring at them and talking to them about their hometown, pissing them off, getting them angry. When people finally meet me in person, there are so many things going through their heads that they don't know how to react. I'm not the guy in the Super Bowl who ran for the winning touchdown. I'm not like the guy on the basketball court who scored a lot of baskets. I'm the guy who's been stabbed 3 times, who once wrestled a bear and who makes a living challenging people twice my size. So what do they say to me? Anyway, I didn't only establish myself on the mic and on the camera while I was in Oregon. I also kicked some serious ass in the ring. Within 3 or 4 weeks on my new circuit, I had won every title the territory had to offer, including the tag team championship with my partner Killer Brooks. Between the two of us we had so many title belts that we needed a wheelbarrow to carry them into the arena before our matches. As you can imagine, this always went over real big with our opponents. Wrestling was again starting to swell in popularity on the West Coast at this time, and I remember how people were talking about me being the tops out west and Ric Flair being the king of the East Coast. In Charlotte, North Carolina, Flair, like me, was kicking ass and gaining a reputation for himself. The two of us had our promoters calling and bragging about our most recent performance each week. The first thing Don Owens did every Monday morning was brag to other promoters all across the wrestling world how he was selling out the Portland Sports Arena. The first question they would ask him was, "Well, who do you have on top?" And he would tell them, "This kid Piper." Well, I don't know why they were shocked. Mike LaBelle had been doing the same thing down in LA for 3.5 years while I was there. Now Owens was selling out Portland, Oregon, for 26 weeks in a row. The buzz on Piper on the West Coast and Flair on the East Coast was showing that a new art had entered the world. Around this time Killer Brooks introduced me to my future wife. It was so hard to meet any nice girls in our business. Just the number of miles we put in traveling around Oregon made a real relationship almost impossible. I'm not going to lie, we had women in every city and state we were in, but none of them were the type you'd want to settle down with. None of us had time to court a girl. Our weeks always looked the same. On Monday we'd usually make a trek out to Longview, which was 60 miles each way, then we'd wake up on Tuesday and make the long haul to Roseburg, which was a 400-mile round trip. Wednesday was even more of a killer, as we had to travel 300 miles each way to Medford. But we would catch a break on Thursdays because we only had to travel to Salem, which was about 50 miles away. Friday was Eugene, which was about 110 miles one way, and Saturday we'd be in Portland. Sunday was usually a rest or travel day, depending on our booking. There was no time for dating, just fun and games on the road. And let me tell you, I was definitely living up to the rowdy nickname I had. The animal in me was really feeling the jungle beat. But even though I was partying the night away, something was missing. Even though I was a young, good-looking, popular, and successful wrestler, I still felt I wasn't complete. One night Killer and I were driving home from a match and we were hungry, but we just couldn't stop anywhere to grab something to eat because number 1, we wanted steak or some kind of meat, and number 2, it was midnight and not too many places were open. Our only option was this place called JoJo's on Sunset Highway in Portland. So we pulled up to the joint and went inside to fill our empty stomachs. Little did I know that JoJo's was going to be the place where I'd meet the girl of my dreams. I was sitting there eating my juicy steak when all of a sudden out of the corner of my eye I spotted this vision of loveliness. Around the corner came this little gal. She couldn't have been more than 19 years old at the time, and I'll never forget that moment or what she was wearing. She had on a little JoJo's uniform with a little brown skirt and her hair was up in a bun, and she was just real wholesome looking. She so impressed me that I blurted out, "You know, Killer, that's the kind of girl a guy would like to marry." I had no intention of trying to meet her, let alone trying to talk to her, but Killer wouldn't hear any of that. He called her over, and he said in his best growling voice, "Hey you. Beautiful. Come over here for a second." But at first she wouldn't come. As a matter of fact, she went straight over to her manager and asked to change sections so she could get away from us. We finally got her to come over to our table and I got the balls enough to ask her out, but she stone cold turned me down. As a matter of fact, for 6 weeks straight I was eating steak at JoJo's trying to get this beautiful girl to go out on a date with me, but I was getting nowhere fast. Finally, as a last resort, I gave her my number because she would never give me hers. I told her if she ever wanted to go out one night to give me a call. A few days later she finally gave me a chance, and I haven't let her out of my heart since. Her name is Kitty. Our first date was kind of comical. Because of my life as a pro wrestler, dating was kind of new to me. Like I said before, we were out with a lot of women on the road, but we were just looking to party and have a good time. So on my way over to pick up Kitty, I was wondering, what do you do on a first date? So being the natural romantic that I am, we went to the park behind the school nearby and swung on the swings. While it was kind of nice, it was also a little odd. Not only was I not used to being in a park on a date, I had a 389mm automatic holstered under my jacket that she didn't know about, and I had smoked a joint on the way over, and then took some Quaaludes so I could come down. What was this poor pretty girl getting herself into? Here was this sweet little Bambi swinging on the swing next to this big wolf in sheep's clothing. But to be honest, I wouldn't change a thing. It all turned out perfect in the end because that relationship developed into a 24-year marriage, and although Kitty's love of animals has cost me a fortune, it was worth it for the 4 beautiful children she's given me. From the first time we met, we both felt an intense familiarity, closeness, and ease with each other. I think that soulmate comfort came into play here, but I was hot on my career, and Kitty's desires led her away to Walla Walla to be with the show horse circuit she loved. Over the next 2.5 years we kept in touch and dated whenever we were in the same town. I can honestly say that I've never met a greater lady than Kitty. With all the shit I put her through over the years, never once has she said she was leaving me, and believe me, as we go along here you'll see if anybody ever had a reason to leave anybody, it was her. I'm not the easiest guy to be married to. But even through all our problems, she's been right there for me, and that's why I'll always have a special place in my heart for JoJo's and Kitty. Around this time I also started using catchphrases in my segments. I started saying things like, every time you think you've got all the answers, I change the questions. Or another famous one, I came here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum. These, like so many other things I did as a wrestler, would be duplicated but never equaled. Everywhere I went people would know these sayings by heart and scream them to me, whether I was wrestling in their home arena or waiting in line to buy a 6-pack of Heineken. Another reason people began screaming at me in Portland was that I started hanging around with a wrestler named Rick Martel. He is the brother of a guy I had wrestled 10 years earlier who had died, Michelle Martel. Rick ended up becoming one of my best friends. He is not only an amazing wrestler, he is also a truly amazing man. The fact that he looked like Sylvester Stallone didn't hurt either, as we had girls by the dozens whenever I was with Rick. Because of his looks, Martel had so many options other than wrestling. There was Hollywood, where he almost became Stallone's double in a couple of movies, and there were always modeling agencies knocking on his door. But for some reason, he chose to stay with wrestling, and selfishly I was glad because I loved the time we spent together. I can honestly say we shared many laughs over the years. I especially loved when he had to do interviews. You have to understand, Rick was a great wrestler, but interviews were not his forte. His French accent killed whatever he was trying to say. Between the girls screaming for him in that terrible accent, you never knew what was being said. One of the things I would do during my interviews was read one of my fan letters on the air. It would always say something like, "Dear Roddy, I watch you wrestle all the time and I think you're the greatest wrestler in the world. I love you and I hope to see you soon. Please kick Buddy Rose's ass. I love you forever. Love, Beverly. P.S. Can you get me a date with Rick Martel?" And then I'd crumple the letter and I'd throw it down and pretend to be mad, bolting from the crow's nest, saying that I was going to find Martel. When I'd find him, I'd take my frustration out on him by yelling at him, telling him about all his love letters that I was getting and that I was sick of them. This type of banter went back and forth between us for some time. Rick became another extraordinary tag partner of mine. We did everything together both inside and outside of the ring. One story I'll never forget happened when we were in Washington during the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Rick had just gotten a brand new black Firebird that he had shipped over from Hawaii when he was wrestling there. I remember the day I went with him to pick it up. We had to travel 200 miles, and when we finally get there, he's like a kid on Christmas morning. We get in the shiny vehicle and one of the first things he does is open up the sunroof. He then takes the beautiful piece of machinery on the highway and puts the pedal to the metal and we start joyriding at 100 miles per hour, both of us enjoying every second of the rush. About 2 weeks later, we again hit the road. But this time it was for business. We jumped in the Black Beauty with our wrestling gear on a gorgeous sunny day in Portland, ready to make the trek to Tacoma, Washington, for a match. Neither of us had a care in the world on this day. We had the radio going, sunroof down, sunglasses on, as we were speeding down the highway toward Washington. But our fun in the sun would soon come to an end. As we're driving, the whole road becomes covered with this grayish substance, and then we see the entire sky go gray on us. The next thing I know, there's this loud boom and we slide head-on into a tractor trailer that jackknifes in front of us. The impact of the crash was so hard that the door handle I was holding onto for dear life ripped off right in my hand. We then realized that Mount St. Helens had erupted and the truck had stopped out of panic. A car containing an old couple had also crashed into the truck. The entire place was now covered with ash, and it looked like we'd just had a snowstorm. You could hardly see your hand in front of your face. We knew that there were going to be cars coming behind us, so we both tried to get out of the car, but weren't having any luck. I tried to kick my door open, but it was jammed shut because the frame of the car had been bent. Then Rick, as calm as 007, taps me on the shoulder and says, "Monsieur, the sunroof is down, we just need to climb up through the sunroof." So we climbed out to safety. At least I thought we were going to be safe. No sooner had we gotten out of the smashed car than Rick and I were busy saving lives. Me, being the honorable man that I was busy saving my own life, as I had to jump onto a cement highway divider in order to dodge an out-of-control cat that was coming right at me while Rick was trying to help out the elderly couple who had been hurt. Bless his heart. Maybe that's why he got more fan mail than me. The police finally arrived on the scene. They got there almost as the crashing stopped and started passing out masks, much like you would see a doctor wear during surgery. Just as I noticed that there were highway patrolmen all over the place, I realized that I had left my Halliburton in the car. I told Rick about my dilemma and he told me to go get it before the cops took the smashed car away from the scene. As I went back to the car, Rick was giving out his insurance information to the cops so he could get reimbursed for his totaled car. After I retrieved my case, I went over to Rick and asked the cops to hurry up the paper filling out process, as we still had a match to get to. I'd be damned if I was going to let a volcano eruption make me miss a match. When he was done, Martel turned around to get one last look at his dream car and he looked so sad, like the commercial with the Indian holding on to his heart as somebody goes by and litters, and a tear falls out of his eye. The next thing I know, we had our thumbs out, and a semi picked us up and we got into Tacoma an hour late. I must admit the ride wasn't the most pleasant, as I sat between Rick and the driver with the gearshift up my ass, but we made it to the match. When we got to the arena, we were greeted by Dutch Savage, the territory's promoter, who was so concerned about our well-being that he said, "Where the fuck have you two been? You're always late. You've got no damn respect." Rick and I just looked at each other and went inside to get changed for our match. We wrestled and got a ride home some other way. Even Mother Nature couldn't keep me from wrestling in the ring. We were now selling out places like Vancouver, British Columbia, and the promoters had to go to bigger buildings in order to accommodate all the fans. This had never happened before. The wrestling business was really starting to pick up in North America. But with this success came cockiness. We felt as though we were above the law and that the laws of society didn't apply to us. We felt that as long as we weren't hurting anybody else, we did what we had to do to get to the next town to entertain the fans and make our next dollar. We never knew. It might be our last dollar or our last match. But even though I was wrestling in front of these huge crowds and having success like never before, I wasn't always hot rod. Every night wasn't the perfect wrestling night for me. I had my share of embarrassing moments in the ring. One night in Vancouver, Rick and I were scheduled to wrestle in a cage match against another popular tag team, the Sheepherders, later to be known as the Bushwhackers, and I remember walking out into that arena and the energy in the building just got my blood pumping. It was a full house and the crowd was going crazy, and I remember walking down the aisle and seeing the cage for the first time, and for some strange reason I just tore ass toward it. Strangely enough, I started scaling the 30-foot cage, making my way to the top. Now, you have to understand why this was so strange. Not only did I have no idea what I was going to do when I got to the top, I also happened to be scared to death of heights. So what the fuck was I doing 30 feet up in the air? And if you think I was crazy, Rick was right behind me. But once I got to the top and I put my foot over, the cage started wobbling. The last thing I saw was the Sheepherders looking up at me like, "What the fuck? Is this guy nuts?" And then I lost my balance and I fell down on my back between the cage and the ropes. Once Rick saw me come crashing down, he gingerly started to make his way back down so he could enter the cage the normal way, through the door. Meanwhile, there I was lying under the bottom rope with my legs up like an old whore and my kilt over my face. I must have looked like Heidi Fleiss that night, but the sheep herders weren't interested. They were content with the sheep that night. Mia wanted to make it look like I had meant to do what I'd done, so I just jumped up after the fall looking to start the match. Eventually, Rick and I decided to move in together. We got a place at the infamous Bomber Hotel. This was a place where most of the guys were staying and it became more like a frat house than our home. There would be all sorts of shenanigans going on at all times of the night at the Bomber. We would come home and there would be girls there making food for us, sleeping in our beds, girls on the porch, anywhere you looked we had girls. Wrestling had reached the height of its popularity in Oregon and we were taking advantage of it. The tag team of Roddy Piper and Rick Martel was so hot in Portland that a local appliance store owner named Tom Peterson asked us to make an appearance. 4,000 people showed up at this store on a hot and muggy day, and there were just 3 tables set up against a wall in the back. After a couple of hours of this madness, we were hot and sweaty and told Mr. Peterson that we needed a break. The store owner didn't even offer us anything cold to drink. So when we were in the back of the warehouse, we decided that we'd exit through the back door, leaving Peterson to deal with the angry crowd and our promoter. The industry was becoming so big so fast that even the promoters didn't know what to do. Wrestling had never had this type of attention before, so they were learning on the fly just like us how to deal with it. We now were at the point where we could fill the PR center in Portland on a regular basis. One of the best draws was always me against Buddy Rose. We built up our rivalry to the point where people couldn't get enough. The rivalry got so intense at one point that Buddy put his prized possession, his yellow Lincoln Mark IV, on the line. The car was even brought into the building for all the fans to see. We also gave the fans an extra special treat for the bout and decided that it was going to be a cage match. This match was an unbelievable show that lasted for 40 long minutes. In the end, I came out of the cage not only the winner, but also the proud new owner of a Mark IV. The best part of winning this match was not getting the car or beating Buddy. It was the reaction of the fans when they saw me driving the yellow Lincoln, soon to be known as the Yellow Canary. They would all scratch their heads and wonder, wow, maybe wrestling really is real? Within the next 3 months, the fans in Portland all knew that I had really taken Buddy Rose's car away from him. The title was transferred to me and everything, so the line between reality and fiction was very fuzzy. This was exactly what I had played on to draw money. But Buddy would have the last laugh. We had 2 matches called Loser Leaves Town, where the loser had to literally pack up and leave the territory. Back in those days, there was one rule to follow in a Loser Leaves Town match: never pack your stuff in advance, because if you did, there was a possibility that you'd tip off the fans, and then why would they bother to come? We didn't want to be like the wrestler who, years earlier, had tipped and ticked off the fans when he was scheduled to take part in a Loser Leaves Town match, and he showed up at the arena driving a U-Haul that was packed with all his belongings. The wrestler had the intention of wrestling in the match and hitting the highway right after. Well, on this night he got an early start because no one stayed to see his match. Not Buddy and me. We were ready to give the fans their money's worth. Our match sold out in record time, and Buddy and I decided that we could milk the fans for another Loser Leaves Town match on another night. So we decided to go the full 60-minute time limit in front of the capacity crowd and end the contest in a draw. The only catch was that we had to find a way to make the audience believe that we were going all out for the win. In this case, our plan was very simple but very effective. You have the good guy, me, and the bad guy, Buddy, battle even almost the entire match, and then at one point both wrestlers get knocked out when the referee does the 10 count at the 45-minute mark and the bell rings. The fans now went crazy thinking that there was a double count out and nobody was going to have to leave town. Just as the fans were ready to riot because they felt like they were ripped off, the ref ordered 2 pails of water and screamed, "The match will continue," and took a bucket and dumped one on me and one on Buddy, and we both came to. We were now ready to go again, and the fans went wild. The first thing I did was to take a bite out of Buddy, which made him bleed profusely. I followed that up with a series of pin combinations that Rose just made it out of. The fans were now totally back into the match, thinking at any second that I was going to beat Rose, but at the 55-minute mark, the psychology came into play. With Buddy lying prone on the ring floor, I climbed up on the ropes and flew off in his direction looking to land a knee drop. But I missed and he rolled over and immediately went to work on my hurt leg, trying to make me give up. As this is going on, the ref is letting the crowd know how much time is left in the match. The fans now start thinking, "Roddy, don't give up. You've only got a few minutes left." But I'm still screaming from the pain that Buddy was inflicting on my leg. Just as I'm about to utter I quit, the bell rings, ending the match in a draw. The fans all jump from their seats screaming and clapping, thankful that I didn't give up. They hadn't gotten closure for what they paid to see. So a rematch was immediately announced for the next week, which was another sellout. This time I got pummeled, pulverized, and pinned by the town heel. I was leaving the promotion back in Buddy Rose's hands. I was now headed to North Carolina to take on new challenges and challengers. I was thankful for the opportunity Buddy had given me to better my career and was grateful for the Yellow Canary, which could do 110 miles per hour all day long and never chirp. This is the end of this chapter. Thanks for listening. Please remember to like and subscribe. Comments help the algorithm.